Hello, and welcome to another episode in the Georgia Workers' Compensation video series. My name is Jason Perkins. I'm an attorney who specializes in handling Georgia workers' compensation cases. I created this series of videos to provide people who've been hurt at work in Georgia with helpful information about Georgia's workers' compensation laws and the benefits they should receive under those laws. Now, let's jump straight into today's topic. Today, I'd like to talk to you about 2024 changes in Georgia workers' compensation law and rules. So, the rules of Georgia's workers' compensation claims and the laws that apply to them are set by the State Board of Workers' Compensation and the Georgia legislature, as well as judges for the Georgia appellate courts. So, in 2024, there were not really any changes to the statutes that govern Georgia workers' compensation cases. Those statutes are put into effect by the legislature, and there really were not any major changes to them. But there were some major changes to the Georgia workers' compensation rules. So the three directors of the State Board of Workers' Compensation usually make changes on an annual basis in July of each year. And in July of 2024, they did make some changes to the Georgia workers' compensation rules. I'm going to talk with you about three of the more important changes that were made to those workers' compensation rules this year. Now, the first change I'd like to talk to you about is a change in medical reimbursement, and specifically medical benefits are one of the main benefits that are provided by Georgia workers' compensation law. So it generally means that the insurance company will pay for your medical treatment and testing with certain authorized doctors, and they cover that 100%. Now, that money's not paid to you, it's generally paid to the doctors, the hospitals, the physical therapists, but the medical treatment is not costing you anything. However, you are entitled to get reimbursed for your travel costs to see the doctors to get medical treatment and testing. This is often referred to as mileage. But a part of that reimbursement that a lot of people don't know about is that if your travel is over a certain period of time, that you may also be entitled to get reimbursed for your meals. And the reason why that reimbursement occurs is that if you're having to travel for over a certain number of hours to get medical treatment or testing, you're probably going to need to eat when you're out and about. So your workers' compensation injury is causing you to have that expense, in addition to the cost of the gas and stuff to get to the doctor. So reimbursement for meals under Georgia workers' compensation law can occur if the total time for travel for outpatient treatment or testing is over 4 hours. And the change that was made in the Georgia workers' compensation rules this year was to increase the total maximum amount per day that you could be reimbursed for meals. Previously it was a lower amount, but it's been increased to $45. So that's the total maximum amount potentially that you can be reimbursed for the reasonable cost of your meals. So it's important to know that if you have extended travel time for medical treatment or testing and you're having to pay for meals, that you should keep those receipts and then submit them for reimbursement, because it can be something the insurance company can have to reimburse you for. And the main reason for this change was that the cost of food has gone up over the last few years. So there needed to be a change in the maximum reimbursement rate to account for that. Now, a second important change that occurred in Georgia workers' compensation rules this year has to do with electronic payments. So most people are familiar with the type of electronic payments. It's direct deposit. Many people are paid by direct deposit. Under Georgia workers' compensation law, insurance companies do not have to choose to pay by direct deposit, but they can choose to pay that way if you agree to it. And the change that was made had to do when direct deposit or other electronic payments are considered to be made by the insurance company. So there are certain deadlines that apply to the insurance company paying you workers' compensation benefits, whether those are wage loss benefits or permanent partial disability benefits or settlements. There's usually a deadline that the insurance company has to make the payment by. So the question was when that direct deposit was considered made. Now, when payments are made by check and those checks are mailed, a different rule applies. When checks are mailed, it's usually the date that the checks are mailed that the check payments are considered made by then. And then there's different deadlines about when the payment must be made by check and when it is mailed. And those deadlines depend on whether the payment was being mailed from outside of Georgia or whether the payment was being mailed from inside of Georgia. But things were not as clear about when payments were made if they were made by direct deposit or other form of electronic payment as opposed to being mailed. So the State Board of Workers' Compensation made a rule change to clarify this. That rule change says that the electronic payment is considered made at the time that the payer initiates an automated clearinghouse electronic funds transfer with its financial institution. So this is a certain process that occurs when the electronic payment is being made. Now, the fact that the State Board of Workers' Compensation chose this as the date that the payment is made means that the payment may be considered made and you have not yet received the funds in your bank account yet. In other words, it could be a day or two later, or maybe even a little more before the funds get into your bank account. But the insurance company may still have been considered to have made the payment on time because of this rule. So if late penalties are potentially owed, then you or your attorney are going to need to look at when the insurance company initiated the automated clearinghouse electronic fund transfer to determine whether that was done on time. Now, a third important rule change that happened this year has to do with appeals, and specifically with Superior Court appeals. So in Georgia workers' compensation claims, there's several different levels of appeal. The initial appeal of a workers' compensation award of an administrative law judge is usually to the appellate division of the State Board of Workers' Compensation. And from that appeal, when there's a decision of the appellate division made, the appeal is usually made to the Superior Court of a county, and the county that it's appealed to is dependent on where your injury occurred. From there, it can be appealed to the Court of Appeals of Georgia potentially, or to the Supreme Court of Georgia. Now, this rule change again has to do with appeals to the Superior Court of Georgia, and it basically focuses on the fact that there was a Uniform Appellate Procedure Act that changed many different types of appeals that was passed within the last couple of years. And it didn't just apply to Georgia workers' compensation claims, it applied to other types of claims in Georgia, but it affected Georgia workers' compensation claims Superior Court appeals. And because this law was passed, there needed to be a change in the rule on Superior Court appeals and workers' compensation claims to make it consistent with that law that had been passed. And that was a change that was made this year. Now, the more important thing to be aware of is that Superior Court appeals in Georgia workers' compensation claims have always been tricky. There's many different kind of traps that you can potentially fall into, and deadlines that you have to meet and make sure that filings are done correctly. So one thing you want to be aware of is if you're dealing with a Superior Court appeal, just be sure that you or your attorney are following the rules to make sure that the appeal is done properly so that your appeal can potentially be considered. Because if you don't meet these different deadlines and rules, then you may lose your appeal, not because you're not right on the merits of your arguments, but procedurally that you didn't meet those deadlines, and the court may just not consider your appeal because of that. I hope you found the information in this video helpful. If you have, please consider two things before you go. First, I'd really appreciate if you give this video a like or a thumbs up, and consider subscribing to this channel if you'd like to be notified of future videos in the Georgia Workers' Compensation video series. Second, if you've got workers' compensation questions, please reach out to get answers. I offer free consultations in Georgia workers' compensation cases. If you'd like to set one of those up, there's two easy ways you can do so. The first is by calling the phone number at the bottom of the screen, and the other is by reaching out to us to our website, which is www.perkinslawtalk.com. Just click on and submit the free consultation request form there, and a member of our team will reach out to you and get a consultation scheduled. I'd like to thank you again for watching this video today. I'd like to wish you the best of luck as you recover from your injuries.